I used to believe my life was ordinary, predictable, almost invisible in its simplicity. To most people, I was just another man driving an aging truck to a city job. A man who lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with trimmed hedges and maples that flamed orange in the fall. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 40 years old, and until recently, I thought my unremarkable routine was enough to keep my world steady. But life has a way of testing the strength of the walls you build, and mine were about to collapse in ways I could never have imagined. My mornings always began the same way. I would wake before the sun, shuffle into the kitchen, and listen to the soft hum of the coffee maker, as it filled the room with the scent of roasted beans. The ritual was comforting, almost sacred. I would stand by the counter, buttering plain toast, staring out the window at the prairies that stretched beyond the neighborhood. The fields rolled on endlessly, reminding me of my childhood on my parents' farm, a place where the horizon was always within reach, but never yours to hold. By 6:30, I would be dressed in one of my worn button-up shirts, a tie that had seen better days, and the same pair of slacks I had rotated through for years. Some might have thought I was careless or unwilling to keep up appearances, but I saw it differently. I valued quiet comfort over vanity. When I slid into my old Chevy truck, its engine sputtering to life like a grumpy companion, I always felt a sense of loyalty to it. That truck had carried me through storms, through long commutes, and even through late-night drives, when the weight of life pressed down too hard to sleep. My job was as dull as the beige walls of the finance office, where I spent most of my days. Endless spreadsheets, endless ticking clocks, endless chatter about promotions that never reached me. But I didn't mind, not entirely. I wasn't chasing titles or applause. What mattered most waited for me at home. Lucas. My son was 8 years old, with a mop of auburn curls that always refused to stay tamed, and eyes so green they reminded me of summer grass after the rain. Lucas was my anchor, the one steady flame in a life that sometimes felt dim. He loved to draw, landscapes, mostly. Rolling fields, rivers bending like ribbons, and wide skies dotted with clouds. I would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching him sketch with a focus that made me smile. He had inherited my quietness, but not my restraint. Where I had learned to bury my emotions, Lucas let his heart spill onto paper with every line of his pencil. It was for him that I endured everything else: the disapproving in-laws, the coldness creeping into my marriage, the whispers that I was a man without ambition. My wife, Sophia, was once the warmth in my life. She was beautiful, vibrant, and full of charm. When we first met, she had seen something in me others did not. Or at least I thought she did. But over the years, something changed. Perhaps it was her work managing a luxury resort, constantly surrounded by the city's elite. Perhaps it was her parents' voices in her ear, reminding her that she had married beneath her station. Her father, Reginald Harrington, was the kind of man who filled every room with his presence. Tall, broad, and forever dressed in tailored suits, he carried himself like a king among peasants. He owned swaths of Topeka through his real estate empire, and never let me forget that the house I lived in belonged to his portfolio. At family gatherings, he would lean back in his chair, sip his wine, and say things like, "You should really think about moving up, Elias. Sophia deserves someone who aspires to more." Her mother, Evelyn, was no less harsh, though her weapons were sharper in their subtlety. She ran a boutique that catered to the city's wealthiest women, dressing them for galas and charity balls. She would glance at my outdated clothes and smile sweetly before asking questions that cut like knives. "Elias, don't you ever feel stuck?" Isn't accounting such a small pond for a man your age? Then there was Marcus, Sophia's brother, who never missed a chance to belittle me. Face it, Elias, he would say with a smirk. You're just along for the ride. Dad's the one who really takes care of Sophia. For a long time, I let their words roll off my back. I told myself that humility was strength, that ignoring their scorn was better than fighting it. After all, I had a secret they knew nothing about. Beneath my modest exterior, I had built something they could never take from me. Late nights, after Lucas was asleep and Sophia was lost in her own world, I studied markets. I invested carefully, quietly, and over the years, I grew wealthier than any of them could imagine. I didn't flaunt it because I didn't need to. My fortune wasn't for show, it was for security, for Lucas, for the peace of knowing I could stand tall if I ever had to. But even the best laid foundations can crumble. It began one crisp autumn morning. The maples outside had turned a fiery red, and the air carried that faint chill that makes you reach for an extra layer. Lucas sat at the breakfast table, his head resting on his hand. His usual chatter was gone. Dad, my head hurts, he whispered, his face pale. I smiled softly, ruffling his curls. Probably just tired, buddy. You were up late drawing last night, remember? He nodded, but the sparkle in his eyes was dim. By afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. His school said he had collapsed. My heart stopped. I drove like a madman in that old Chevy, its engine groaning as if it, too, understood the urgency. When I reached the hospital, the world tilted beneath me. The doctor's words came like hammers. Late-stage brain tumor. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, my mind refusing to accept what I was hearing. How could an 8-year-old, full of life and dreams, be facing something so cruel? Sophia arrived hours later, her perfume filling the sterile room. She looked concerned, yes, but distant, like her mind was already elsewhere. She stayed only briefly, muttering something about a meeting she couldn't miss. In the days that followed, I never left Lucas's side. I watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his drawings slow until the pencil slipped from his fingers. He would look up at me and whisper, "Dad, can we go home? I just want to draw in the porch light again." My heart shattered each time, but I forced a smile, telling him stories of prairies and rivers, promising that one day we would sit there again, the Harringtons visited now and then, their presence more burden than comfort. Reginald's words stung the most. Did you even take him for regular checkups, Elias? Or were you too busy living small? Evelyn would sigh dramatically, saying, "This is why ambition matters. With better care, maybe this wouldn't have happened." I wanted to scream at them, to throw them out, but I stayed silent for Lucas's sake. Then one golden autumn afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery where Lucas rested. The air was crisp, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. I carried sunflowers, his favorite, and laid them gently by his grave. The headstone bore his picture and the words I had chosen, Lucas Thorne, our eternal light. Kneeling there, I whispered, "I stood tall, son. For you. And I will keep standing." The wind rustled the leaves as though he answered, and for the first time since that terrible night, I felt a deep, lasting peace. I realized then that my story wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. The Harringtons' arrogance had destroyed them, but my humility and perseverance had carried me through. I had proven to myself, and to anyone watching, that true strength isn't measured by wealth or status, it's measured by integrity, resilience, and the courage to endure. The moral was clear: never judge a person by the surface of their life. A quiet man may carry more strength than a king, and dignity outlasts vanity every time. Pride built on mocking others will always crumble, while resilience forged in hardship endures. As I stood up from Lucas's grave, the prairie stretched wide before me, endless and full of promise. For the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what lay ahead. I was Elias Thorne. I had lost much, but I had found more. And my story was only beginning. When I first walked into that small apartment in downtown Topeka, carrying nothing but 2 boxes of clothes and a folder stuffed with Lucas's sketches, I thought I had reached the end of my story. The walls were bare, the air smelled faintly of old paint, and the window looked out over busy streets instead of rolling prairies. Yet, as I set Lucas's final drawing on the shelf above the desk, I realized I wasn't done, not yet. Grief had hollowed me out, but in that emptiness, something new began to grow. I remember sitting in the silence of that apartment, staring at the city lights, when a thought rose inside me like a quiet flame. It's time. 4 years. I had played the role of the humble man, content to let others believe I was small. I let the Harringtons mock me, allowed Sophia to drift away, all while building something they never imagined. My portfolio, my investments, my careful strategies, they were not trophies of greed. They were the quiet weapons of survival. Now, they would become something more. The next morning, I met with my attorney, Miriam Locke. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. We sat in a diner that smelled of fresh pie and strong coffee. I slid a folder across the table, filled with documents she had never seen. "Miriam," I said, my voice steady. "Consolidate everything. All the holdings, all the shares. It's time to bring it into the light." She raised an eyebrow, flipping through page after page of stock certificates, property deeds, and venture agreements. "Elias," she whispered, almost smiling, "you've been hiding a kingdom." I nodded. "Not for me. For Lucas. But now, for justice." Among the papers was my quiet ace, a significant stake in Reginald Harrington's real estate company. Years ago, during one of his firm's downturns, I had begun buying shares under anonymous holdings. While Reginald mocked me for being small, I had slowly become one of the largest private shareholders in his empire. He never noticed because I never flaunted it. That was about to change, but it wasn't just ownership. I had proof of his corruption too. Sleepless nights had taught me more than numbers, they had shown me patterns. In Reginald's books, there were gaps, siphoned funds, bogus shell deals, embezzlement disguised as consulting. I had collected it all. The Harringtons had taken my son, my marriage, my home, and they had spat on my dignity. Now, they would answer for it. The annual shareholder meeting for Harrington Real Estate came sooner than I expected. It was held in one of the sleek downtown conference centers, all glass and polished marble, filled with men in expensive suits and women in glittering jewelry. I wore a simple navy suit, new, but modest, one that fit me without pretense. When I walked into that hall, conversations faltered. I saw Reginald at the front, his booming voice filling the room as he outlined projections, all bravado and charm. Evelyn sat near the stage, her pearls gleaming under the lights. Marcus leaned casually against a chair, his smirk as irritating as ever. When I stepped forward, Reginald paused mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing. "Elias." He laughed, the sound carrying easily through the room. "What are you doing here? Looking for a handout?" The room chuckled with him. Evelyn shook her head, whispering something to a neighbor. Marcus leaned forward, sneering. "Careful, Dad, he might ask for a loan." I felt none of the shame they expected. Instead, I unfolded my papers and handed them to the moderator. "Actually, I'm here as one of your largest shareholders. I own 12% of Harrington Real Estate." And I have some concerns. The silence that followed was delicious. You could have heard a pin drop. Reginald's smile faltered, his color rising. Evelyn gasped softly, and Marcus's smirk slid into disbelief. I stepped to the microphone, my voice calm but firm. 4 years, I've sat quietly while this family ridiculed me, dismissed me, and treated me as nothing. What they didn't know is that while they wasted money on appearances, I invested wisely. And while they called me small, I grew large enough to stand here today. Then I revealed the documents. Embezzlement. Fraudulent partnerships. Misuse of shareholder funds. I laid it all out, page by page, projection by projection, until the room erupted in murmurs. Shareholders demanded answers. Voices rose, accusing, furious. Reginald tried to bluster, but the evidence was undeniable. Evelyn's face turned pale. Marcus shouted something about lies, but no one listened. By the end of the meeting, a no-confidence vote had been called. Reginald Harrington, the man who had towered over me for years, was ousted from his own company, disgraced. The news spread like wildfire across Topeka. Headlines screamed, "Quiet accountant exposes corruption, Harrington dynasty crumbles." Reporters swarmed, investors fled, and the empire began to collapse overnight. Reginald was forced to sell assets to cover debts. Evelyn's boutique shut its doors, and Marcus's side ventures dried up without his father's shadow to support them. I should have felt triumphant. In some ways, I did. But what I felt more than anything was relief. Not for their downfall, but for finally standing tall, for showing them that humility was not weakness. Sophia came to me not long after. She appeared at my office, her once confident stride faltering. The shine in her eyes was gone, replaced with desperation. Victor Langford, the man she had left me for, had abandoned her once the Harrington name began to stink. She stood across my desk, tears brimming. "Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide what you had? We could have had everything." I looked at her for a long moment, memories of Lucas flooding my mind. "I didn't build it for everything," I said quietly. "I built it for Lucas. For us. But you chose differently. You chose betrayal." Her tears fell then, but I felt nothing but a cold finality. She left without another word, and I knew that chapter of my life had closed forever. With the Harringtons' empire dismantled, I turned my focus to what truly mattered. I bought a small home on the edge of the prairies, a place where the sunflowers stretched high and the horizon seemed endless. I invited my parents, Harlan and Myra, to live with me. They had grown old on the farm, their hands weathered from decades of work. Seeing their joy in the new house, watching my father sit on the porch with pride, hearing my mother hum as she tended the garden, filled me with a peace I hadn't known in years. I didn't chase opulence. I didn't buy mansions, or cars, or jewelry. Instead, I invested modestly, supported local schools, and funded a small art program for children in Lucas's name. When I visited classrooms and saw kids drawing landscapes with bright eyes and free hearts, I felt as though my son's spirit was alive among. Weeks passed like a blur of sorrow. The bills mounted, my world narrowed to a hospital room, and through it all, Sophia drifted further away. She claimed stress from work, but I knew. I could feel it. Her heart was no longer with us, and then, one moonlit night, it ended. Lucas slipped away quietly, his hand in mine, his last breath carrying with it all the light in my world. I whispered stories until the very end, about the prairies, the clouds, the endless horizon. His small hand grew still, and in that silence, part of me died too. The funeral was small, held in a modest chapel. Neighbors came, offering heartfelt condolences, their words heavy with sincerity. But the Harringtons stood apart, their eyes full of judgment. Reginald leaned toward Sophia and muttered loud enough for me to hear, "If he had provided better, Lucas might still be alive." Sophia said nothing. She stood there in silence, letting their poison seep into the air. After the service, I clutched Lucas's final sketch. It was unfinished, but beautiful. A prairie scene with our family drawn in simple lines, all of us together beneath a wide sky. I held it to my chest, vowing that no matter what happened, I would never let his memory fade, but grief was not the only weight on my shoulders. Betrayal soon followed. Sophia returned to her routines almost immediately. She stayed late at the resort, came home with vague excuses, her phone buzzing with messages she hid from me. One night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at bank statements. Charges appeared that I couldn't explain: lavish dinners, flights, luxury hotels. When I confronted her, she brushed it off. Business expenses, Elias. Don't start. Doubt gnawed at me until I searched deeper. On her social media, there it was, a photo of Sophia, smiling on a beach in Orlando, her arm linked with Victor Langford, a tech investor known around town. The caption read, "New horizons and joy." I can't describe the feeling that surged through me then. It was more than anger, more than sorrow. It was betrayal sharpened into something cold and enduring. When I came home the next evening, divorce papers lay on the table. Her note was brief, almost casual: "It's over, Elias." Sorry, the Harringtons, of course, reveled in my downfall. When I went to confront them at their mansion, Reginald laughed in my face. "Pathetic has-been. Did you really think you were ever worthy of my daughter?" Evelyn sneered, telling me to vacate their property. Marcus leaned against the wall, smirking, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing, Elias. Always have been." I walked away that night with a fire burning in my chest. 4 years, I had endured their scorn, hidden my strength for the sake of peace. But as I packed my things, gathering Lucas's mementos and moving into a modest apartment, I made a silent promise. They had taken everything from me, or so they thought. They had no idea what I had built in the shadows, and they would soon learn what it may.